Sullivan, you can lead off.
Mr. Peters, we're 3 weeks out from the election. Let's get straight to the point. National or Labour, who do you coalesce with?
New Zealand First is a democratic party. And we want the people of this country to speak first on election night and decide who it is and in what numbers will be in Parliament. And we're resolved, and that's the resolution since April '94, we've never changed our position, that when that decision has been made by the New Zealand people before the politicians, we'll meet as a party with our MPs in our hierarchy and take a democratic decision in the long-term economic and social interests of this country.
But how are New Zealanders going to tell you on election night who you should go into coalition with?
Well, they'll decide who's going to be in Parliament. You see, what's going on now...
Well, of course they will. I mean, that's a truism.
Well, it may be a truism, but not obvious to a lot of commentators who have been out there in a feeding frenzy of coalition organisation, even though they're not involved in party organisation themselves. And we intend to ignore that and to ensure that we make the people the masters of this process so that they vote on election night, decide first, tell us, not the politicians.
What message will the people have to give you on election night to tell New Zealand First that it should go into coalition with National? What message will the voters have to give you on election night to tell you that you should go into coalition with Labour?
A very simple thing. They'll tell us who's going to be in Parliament and in what numbers. And if anybody around here knows what that answer is before the people speak, then pray tell me. We might be able to form some
No, I'm not suggesting for a minute that I know the answer to that. But are you saying to us that if National ends up being the party with the largest number of seats in Parliament, that New Zealand First would take the message that it's National that you should go into coalition with?
No, that's the alliance principle. They said that they would support in a no-confidence motion the party with the greatest number of votes. A principle, I might add, that's been changed 3 times.
Well, let me ask you, what's New Zealand First's principle?
Well, our principle is to wait until the people speak on election night, decide who's going to be in Parliament and what numbers those parties will comprise, and then make a decision, as a democratic party should, all of us, not just the leader right now, but all of the party, based on what's good for New Zealand.
What would you do, though, if Labour and National have roughly similar numbers of seats? I mean, who are you going to favour?
Well, I think I might have to repeat it again. We are going to take a democratic decision after the election and thereby be bound for it for 3 years. That is an offer of long-term stability. But I'm seeing all sorts of politicians making statements now where they're literally dictating to their party, they've never consulted, and they're not going to be bound in the end of the day by that decision. You're going to see chunks of Labour fall off, I believe chunks of National fall off, and definitely chunks of the Alliance.
But you seem to be saying that you seem to be saying that the democratic rights of the New Zealand First caucus after the election are more important than the rights of New Zealand voters to know what sort of government they're going to get if they cast a vote for New Zealand First.
Well, I think you missed the point. It's the people of this country who are going to decide the most critical part of a future government, and that is who it is that will be in Parliament. Because you're forgetting that it's not the executive or the government that people are voting for, they're voting for a Parliament. And we're not going to be deviated from that. Democracy, you see, requires a party to consult its own members and its members of Parliament. Why would members of Parliament feel bound to the party line if they've not been consulted?
Well, let's ask you now, who do you see yourself as being more compatible with? Labour, National, Alliance. Say there is a range of options open, for you that night or the next day. Which one would you see yourself being most compatible with now? All the policies are out. Would it be Labour?
Well, you know, if you look at the actual process, as I've observed it abroad, then compatibility may be what emerges from negotiations. Compatibility now could be something quite different.
What do you consider to be negotiable? In your policy at the moment, what do you think is negotiable?
Not too much.
And would you find it easier to negotiate with Labour? You know, I'm trying to ask you if you would agree that it seems to me that there's much more compatibility between you and Labour than there is between any other 2 parties that are likely to get a number of votes. Do you see it that way too?
No, I don't. You see, I've looked at the performance and record of those other 3 parties in Parliament right now that are elected parties, and their record has been to chop and change, desert manifestos, and in the obsession for power or position themselves They have made substantial changes between elections and over a long period of time. I think that the negotiation process is not going to therefore be difficult.
Hey, you're going into negotiations with some fixed positions, though. You're
That's
saying
right.
that you don't want Birch and Bolger and Shipley in place. Tow Henry has said he doesn't want a bar of being in coalition with the national government. I mean, what are voters to make of all of this?
Well, they're to make of it that when we say something, we mean it. I haven't, and the party hasn't gone to the enormous sacrifice it has to start itself in the space of 3 years because it had enough, as New Zealanders have had, of certain political practices in this country, to then turn around and put those people in power. And really, you know, you're asking rather too much to think that I want to see Jim Bolger as Prime Minister. I don't think he's fit for the job. And one serious engagement, which makes up the biggest scandal this country's ever seen, is all the evidence I need of that. He was engaged in the worst political cover-up this country has ever seen. And I don't think...
Bruce Jesson, writing in the latest issue of the New Zealand Political Review, Mr. Peters, says that you told a public meeting in the Otahuhu Town Hall in late July that New Zealand First would not do a deal with National. He quotes you. He stated categorically that there would be no coalition with National.
Well, you know, I don't think I've ever had a meeting at the Otahuhu Town Hall. I've had a meeting at Otahuhu, but it wasn't a town hall for a kick-off, so if he got that wrong, he may have got the rest wrong.
Well, did he get the rest wrong?
Well, he may have.
You have never, you have never made this
no,
public statement.
I think if he's quoting me, he's quoting exactly what I said just then. We have not busted ourselves to put Jim Bolger back into power.
But there are other members of the Cabinet who made that same decision to not hold an inquiry into the BNZ. Why Bolger, Birch and Shipley?
Because a leader sets a standard of leadership, sets a standard of political policy and principle.
But if I can come back to this point of coalescing, aren't you being a bit off the pace when you say that you won't make a deal with National and you won't isolate anyone, when in this just last week you've pointed to a ministry of talented people that you want to appoint, and you've already singled out Mike Moore, so surely there's something going on in the back of your brain on this particular issue.
No, you see, I've looked at this controversy that's reared its head in the space of really 3 weeks, and it's media-driven. And then you say to me, now we've got a little frenzy going, you must answer it. Well, I'm saying straight up here in front of the New Zealand people, this is their decision to make. The most critical elements are all theirs to make.
But you've already handpicked Mr. Moore, so clearly you have some leanings towards particular politicians, and he is of the left, of Labour. Why him?
Well, but look, get this first of all correct. How do I know the Labour Party is going to be there in substantial numbers? Or the Alliance, for that matter.
I'm having some problem with this. You're saying, on the one hand, that...
I'm having a problem trying to get my answer out. Each time I've been chipped at the end, and I'd like to finish it. I'm coming to the point. Until you know who's there, how do you know you're going to be dealing with that party? Take the United Party. They're in coalition now. Should I have discussions with them now?
You have said on several occasions, quote, most people realise that only New Zealand First can stop National. Mr. Peters, I suggest to you that there is only one way of reading that remark. That remark means that
Precisely.
If you vote New Zealand First, National won't be part of the next government.
That's right. You know, we're going out to be the government, to be in a government led by New Zealand First. We're not going for second best or talking about hypotheticals or looking backwards as we head out on this last 3 weeks of this campaign. And we think we can do it. And people out there give me to believe that they think we can do it as well. And I don't really pay too much mind to these polls, for we've always believed since April of '95 that we have done far better in reality than what the polls were actually saying.
But the message you're giving is vote New Zealand First, no National.
No, I'm saying vote New Zealand First leading the government. And that's the only message I want to put out there. That the only party that can beat National in this election is not the Alliance, is not Labour, it's New Zealand First.
But the reality is, though, that you, at this stage, 3 weeks out, have only half the poll support of National. I know you say you don't believe the poll ratings for your particular party, but every party says that, and I would put it to you that that's not, in fact, the case.
But
and you've got a big gap to make up.
Yeah, but I believe National's poll ratings, and if you've wanted an answer as to why they're obsessed with New Zealand First and have spent so much time attacking us in the most spurious of attacks and claims, it's in the poll they themselves have which I've got access to.
Would you answer me this? Voting should be a matter of informed consent, I would have thought. Would you tell me why you think New Zealanders don't have a right to know, before they cast their vote, who you're going to line up with?
It's because you don't seem to have grasped what I'm saying here. It's the New Zealand people who will decide who composes Parliament and in what numbers. And if you're...
Are you saying they have no interest whatsoever in the kind of government that emerges after the election?
Look, I was an MMP supporter when no other leader was, when they were all, the rest of them, implacably opposed to it. Now, that's a fact, and I'm not having this process perverted by politicians who want to scheme before the election to plot to remove the power of the public's will. That's where I stand, and I'm not moving from it.
The Alliance says no deals with National. Labor says no deals with National. You won't come clean on this.
Well, look, I've said to you as clearly as I can what we believe in, what the principles are, and how MMP actually works. For if we're going to decide the next government beforehand, then let's forget the 12th of October. You've all made up your mind that you can actually construct a government without the people deciding who its components will be.
But you've already started doing that with issuing an invitation to Mike Moore to be part of this ministry. So how can you now say that this all happens afterwards when you already are putting in place, arguably, the coalition building steps?
I've outlined a position that we're going to take, and I outlined that on the 21st of July.
Why issue the invitation to Mike Moore?
Because I think that you should, if you are looking for the best people in particular areas, and foreign trade is one of them, where you can hit the ground running. If you've got the potential to grab an experienced person as opposed to training one, then I'd go for experience, and that's why I made the offer.
Who else are you shoulder tapping then?
Well, there are others, and we'll make the offer. And they can serve it. Don't forget, we have a very restricted cabinet size, down to 15.
We're going to take a short break. We're back in a moment.
Monday on the Fraser Election Special, Education.
We're taking the program out of the studio to the voters.
Join Fraser in Dunedin to debate the critical issue, education, with Minister Wyatt Creech and the opposition education spokespeople. You can join the audience in Dunedin for this Education Election Special. Call us on 0800 244 556. The Fraser Election Special, 10 o'clock Monday on 1.
If the DNA in this blood matches, we've got it. The chief wants the results first thing.
All right, you with me.
Canteen's closing.
All right. That evidence was just here. Anyone moving?
Most powders have no enzymes. Some have one. But only Dry Power Scoop has 2 different enzymes to shift the toughest stains.
Oh, not a trace.
Dry double-action enzymes. Drive out stains.
Improve efficiency and reduce costs at the same time with the Brother Fax 590MC, now only $699, including GST. It's 4 machines in one, a fax machine with an anti-curl system and paper cutter, a telephone, a photocopier and a digital answering machine. It connects to the Telecom Faxability Network and your PC compatibility with optional missing link software. The Brother Fax 590MC for $699 from your participating Brother dealer.
We're at your side, brother.
Moving home is never easy. You always own more stuff than you thought, and more often than not, it'll rain. That's why you get more than just a great mortgage rate with Countrywide Bank. Every day until December 14, all Countrywide Bank mortgage customers go in the draw to win $500 to spend at Levine, which could, if nothing more, go towards a little comfort. Make yourself known to the bank where more than money matters.
Pro 6, the hero is here. If you're looking for bloat control, 4 important trace minerals, including selenium, getting your cows in calf and more milk. Get Bloat Aid Tracer High SE. Proven mineralized bloat protection.
Hi, Sue Pollard here. I'm in a stage show here in New Zealand, The Good Sex Guide.
Love to show you some of the action, but it's too hot for television. If male and female nudity offends, don't attend. The Good Sex Guide. Book now.
Welcome back to this Meet the Press election special. My guest tonight, Winston Peters, and with me journalists Brendan Burns, Fran O'Sullivan and Gordon McLaughlin. Gordon.
Election advertisements have made personal style and leadership an issue in this election. Now, David Longy in the House a while ago referred to your being waylaid by a full-length mirror. You have this reputation for vanity. How did you earn this reputation?
Well, I mean, I could be sort of vindictive and say at least I can fit in one. But I don't think it's actually serious, and it probably relates to colleague envy.
But it's, I've heard it before, it's not only from David Longy. You have this image. Has it been spread? Is it a whispering campaign?
Look, it's an old joke.
Yeah.
Paul East started, a former flatmate of mine, and it's not a bad one, actually. I've used it myself.
Is this personal ambition, or this alleged vanity anyway, would that be a problem if you were going to negotiate a coalition? I mean, could you negotiate, could you be Deputy Prime Minister for the greater good? Could you? Could you be Deputy Prime Minister to Helen Clark for the greater good? Look,
I've resigned for the greater good on a matter of principle. I've got a record of putting other things before myself,
so you could
unlike others who might make that allegation.
So you could be Deputy Prime Minister to Helen Clark. Given the, you know, depending on how the election falls, you could subjugate your ambition for the greater good.
And I have.
And you
would.
In
the past.
Yes.
Both with respect to my removal from a cabinet, caucus, a by-election, and 6 very high-cost defamation cases.
Yes. The other personal style thing that interests people is that there is a kind of Muldoon popularism, or populist style about it. We saw it in Howick with the immigration thing. I think it's a valid criticism, and I think that people are aware of it. Are you exploiting these certain sorts of issues? Do you find that a valid political technique?
I've never understood why people object to populism, for I've never found a politician who wantonly wanted to be unpopular. The second thing is, I think if you track through my record, I've taken on unpopular issues, or issues that had no currency, and they've gained currency because they're actually plain common sense and in the national interest. And so I've never reacted to that allegation. If people say I'm populist, well...
I think by populist they mean that you identify the fears and anxieties of people and you exploit them.
No, but
Muldoon was a master at that, and I just wonder if you did that at Howick. It seemed to me you did. Even people who would agree with your immigration policy, I'd think, would say he exploited an opportunity there, a populist opportunity. He exploited the fears and anxieties of lots of people.
Look, they're my fears. They're my fears. They're my anxieties. I don't want a country where the population doubles in something like 35 years without any consultation with New Zealanders. I like this country the way it is in terms of population size, personally, but I'm willing to consult my fellow New Zealanders about that. I think that we should be focused on the per capita income increase rather than trying to quick fix it by way of immigration. But I'll make one other point.
Yeah.
When I went out to preach accountability to the Maori people, I did it because I had a background that told me that the ordinary Maori was being sidelined and marginalised while a certain group in collusion with government were putting together plans of no long-term benefit to the Maori people. It wasn't popular, and I took some hammering from it. But I stood my ground, and today accountability is a byword in Maoridom.
You do have an ability to get ahead of an issue, though, don't you? I mean, the immigration issue is a classic. I mean, it's been sitting around as an issue in this country for some years. You saw it, and you promoted it, and it's been the main contributor to your poll rise.
No, it's not really. It's not the main contributor at all. But it is an indication to people that I might understand what this country long-term needs. And what it needs is to develop the resources for its own people and not to use immigration as some sort of excuse for failing to career prepare and employ New Zealanders. And that's what I see happening. Out of med school come about 400 doctors, 235 can't get placed in New Zealand medicine. At the same time as we are importing 400 doctors. These sorts of scenarios are duplicated all over New Zealand professions. 1,000 teachers coming in.
Of course, the curbs,
we're not training our own people.
The curbs on immigration have already taken place. Their policy last October put in place the curbs to the levels that you're sort of seeking now.
That's myth. That's myth. It's not fact. The reality is that over 55,000 permanent approvals occurred up to June, that's the last measurable date of this year.
Just staying...
200,000 since nationals came
immigration
to power.
policies take quite some time to work their way through.
No, they don't. I know something about immigration. Just as a practitioner.
It's just coming back to this issue of leadership. Isn't it a truism that most of your poll rating has been built on essentially an oppositionist type mentality, if you like, and appeal out there? How do you translate that perhaps into being Prime Minister, which I take from your comments in the last segment of the show, that's where you see yourself being after the election?
Well, you know, when you're in opposition, you're in opposition. You may make proposals, but in our system, they have rarely been heeded. That's a sad thing about the democracy the way it once was, and that's one of the reasons why I am supporting, and have been for a long time, supporter of a changed electoral system. But I come back to my point. And the one time I had to do something in a position of responsibility as Minister of Maori Affairs, I went to the Maori people and we constructed a policy which was one of enormous sacrifice, where 3/4 of the civil servants would lose their jobs and all the other perks, to construct a 4-point focused policy.
But Mr. Peters, you didn't stay in Cabinet and see that through. I mean, surely you could be attacked by that base for not hanging about in there and just staying with your colleagues in the Cabinet instead of marching off into the wilderness for a while.
You mean stay there and do nothing? That's what I've seen many ministers do. If I'd have been left there for another 2 years, that policy would be roaring now. But the reality is, it became clear to me that Jim Bolger gave me the job to finish off my political career. The reverse happened. I managed to go to a people which hated National and turn them on side of a policy which they had. No, I want to tell you how the process is going to work if I'm the person in power. We know something about how to approach people and get them on side. We know something about what drives people and gives them hopes and aspirations. Kawatea was constructed to fit any group of people, whether it was Alaska or Europe or, in this case, the Maori. But it was a program of sacrifice for a better tomorrow. It got torpedoed, and I regret that. But the process was right. You never saw any Maori protest
But you contributed to the torpedoing by not staying around, by not building a constituency among your colleagues. Surely that's a portent of things to come if you cannot build that constituency to get through a policy which obviously you hold dear to your heart.
Well, look, I'm prepared to compromise some things, but when I see a wholesale ditching of a manifesto, whether it was state assets, whether it was a balanced economic policy, whether it was a view that investment in education was critical, or that we would fulfill our promises on health, all those things, National properly ditched after the 1990 election. You tell me I should stomach that and hang around for my own personal ambition? Sorry.
No, I'm saying
for
the people that you hope to help, for the Maori people.
Yes, I would like to have stayed on. But in the end, you know what the trigger point was? It was a shonky, illegal deal of Americans with the Maori trustees' funds, which he was illegally investing. When I promised a full-scale public inquiry, I was gone within 2 days.
We're going to take another break now. We're back shortly with Winston Peters.
There's death in our house.
The truth is often hard to bear.
Lost a son and a grandson.
Jim, I've got some bad news for you.
It's about my will. I want to make a new one.
I'm sorry.
A difficult day on Coronation Street.
What do you call a wage slave without a wage, Kev?
I'm not your fantasy. I knows I'll marry.
I'll tell you something, it's a laugh a minute every now and then.
Though times may be a-changing.
Still emigrate to Australia.
A week's worth of Coronation Street in one dramatic night at the special time of 8 o'clock Tuesday.
Rose, what is the best deterrent to criminal behaviour?
Well, as I've always said, you know, criminals must behave. So really the only avenue is to say to the criminals that that is the case.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
If you want to be better informed on the issues of the week, read the New Zealand Listener. New Zealand Listener, always well informed.
But, yeah.
I've never bought carpet before. Where do I start? What's the difference between Axminster and Berber? Wool, 80-20, synthetic. Which?
Does good underlay make a difference?
Is the installation guaranteed?
Vinyl flooring, slate timber or ceramic. It's a big decision.
You've got the questions. We've got the answers to any flooring question at over 40 Carpet Court stores nationwide.
I've just got to know it's right.
Carpet Court. The right advice and the right price.
More mudslinging on the election trail today. A four-party debate turned sour on the subject of local conservation. Several of the mainly superannuitant audience had to be
When you've spent 50 years building an international reputation for reliability, where do you go from there? When your brand is stamped on over 55 million printers across the world, where do you turn next? When you've shut out the competition so quickly to become one of the world's fastest growing personal computer companies, what drives you to be even more? And when you're the only one in your field with the depth of products and the ability to connect them as one total system under one single brand, by what all-encompassing name do you go? Hewlett-Packard.
For a wide range of pain, Nurofen offers fast, effective relief. Whether you're suffering from back pain or headache, period pain or toothache, Nurofen works right where you hurt, so you can get on with your life.
Now you don't buy a bed every day.
Bedpost and Sealy Posturepedic have got together to bring you the 15 by 15 Sealy sale. All Sealy Posturepedic beds are available at 15% off and with 15 months to pay. That makes the new Pillars of Strength models with their increased lumbar support even more affordable. As an extra special, Bedpost are offering the Sealy Garland at just $8.99. The 15 by 15 Sealy sale for a limited time and only at Bedpost.
You can sleep on it.
You're with Meet the Press, our guest tonight, Winston Peters, and with me journalists Gordon McLaughlin, Fran O'Sullivan and Brendan Burns. Gordon.
All your policies, all the New Zealand First policies are derivative. During the period you were in Parliament or in government, the short period admittedly, you didn't achieve anything at all. You've never done anything constructive, I might add. Why should New Zealanders believe that in government you could?
Well, that's your view and you're entitled to it. But I think that my drive to gain accountability in the Maori world as the Maori Affairs spokesman for National did work. I think that Kawatea is an enormously exciting program that'll uplift the Maori people and make them contributors to New Zealand in a full and equal way, and will remove the enormous dependency that's such a blight on both them and the taxpayer today.
But these policies as well, the policies New Zealand First policies now are basically derivative. There's nothing there
just,
that
just one thing. When you say I've done nothing,
yes.
Remember I saw some of the most corrupt practices going on in a certain business sector in this country. When others wouldn't raise a finger, we raised the roof. And I don't think that's just nothing. I think it goes to the core of an open, transparent democracy.
You claim to be the only honest party in New Zealand politics.
I've never said that.
Well, let me quote what you have said constantly. We are the only party that can restore honesty and credibility to New Zealand politics. There seems to me, Mr. Peters, to be a credibility cloud, at least over some of your policies. Rex Widdestrom, who was a New Zealand First candidate and a New Zealand First employee, said that one of his disappointments was the number of policy U-turns that you've made. Now, he's right, isn't he?
No, he's wrong. And sadly, he's explaining his unpreparedness to, once having accepted a democratic system for the list, to accept the results.
He's not wrong, he's right. You look at the number of flip-flops that New Zealand First has made in policy over recent months, and there's every reason there to distrust what New Zealand First might do in office.
Oh, look, with respect, New Zealand First put out a wide series of policy drafts, consulted both publicly in some occasions and with the party. And then it came to finality, and if adjustments had to be made on the question of costings, ability to deliver what one's promising, and we made changes, well, you know, so what? Isn't it better to do that before the election, so that for 3 years you can keep your word, than to do what National Labour did, change everything after the election without any consultation or mandate whatsoever.
Not if you end up drawing a reputation for being shifty. You were going to ban all land sales to foreigners. You softened that policy.
No.
Foreign investors were not going to be allowed to buy controlling stakes in land and New Zealand land and assets.
Look, you won't be
You softened that.
You won't be seeing the foreigners buying rural land in this country under a New Zealand First government.
You didn't say rural land when you announced the policy in the first place, Mr. Peters.
I know, but you won't see foreigners buying rural land. You won't see foreigners taking over our key infrastructural resource assets and strategic assets. And that's what we've settled on, because that's the policy that we can live with in a commercial and economic sense.
Okay, there was going to be no second round of tax cuts under a New Zealand First government.
I agree with you, I agree, and I'll concede that with this exception. We disagreed with the second round of tax cuts because of the crisis in education and health. But then we came to the view that we needed to start a long-term saving strategy, and there was the money to do it. So agree with the tax cuts, apply that money straight into a long-term savings regime which this country desperately needs, and that was the reason. So we made a change. Is it in the long-term beneficial interest of the country? Yes. And second, do the public know about it before they vote? Yes, and that's what's important.
You may be able to give me chapter and verse of the reason in each case why you've changed the policy, but it is not, I submit to you, wrong for Rex Widdestrom to say that you have executed U-turns.
Look,
those are U-turns.
Look, with respect, I'm not going to sit on this program and discuss Mr. Widdestrom, a staff member who couldn't accept the democratic process of a party.
Discuss his point. Discuss his point.
Well, no, but his point's not made for that reason. His point's made in some vindictive fashion because the widest democracy of any party decided that he wouldn't be as high as he thought he should be.
The point is this.
And that's sad.
The point is this. If you change your policies as apparently as easily as you do before an election, why should we trust you not to execute the same sorts of U-turns once you're in office?
Oh, I think you're making far too much of this. Look, we're going into an election with a committed manifesto that is costed, analysed by independent experts, and we know we can live with it. You know, if you, for example, take the state housing position we had. We had a policy to support 70,000 people in state housing. But in a party debate that took a long time and on research and analysis, we found that 205,000 families in private rentals, same circumstances, identical earnings, were being totally left out. We made the right decision in the end. We changed our policy to help all the tenants, all 275,000 of them, by a 20% increase in their supplementary assistance and a 45 million hardship grant. And all of us went in there opposed to the idea to change. We all came out agreeing to change. I'm glad we did. It's fair.
And there'll be no analysis after the election. You go in with a manifesto, you go in with some promises. What we see is what we get.
That's right.
If you can
and that's why I said at the start, unlike the rest, there are things we will not sell out.
If you can be so flexible on issues like the sale of land and the assets issue, why have you been so intractable on superannuation? The policy before the Parliament to give most superannuitants an increase in their amount that they receive, you wouldn't support it. It means people like Sir Ron Trotter get a state pension through your policy. Is that fair?
Look, both in our tax policy, which is being announced in a matter of days, and in our economic policy, and in our social policy, and in every other philosophy we might have, we can't justify taxing people for being old. If you can, fine. If Labour, Alliance and National can, fine. We can't, we won't, and we started this party on one of the founding principles that motivated us was to get rid of the surtax. We're committed to it, and we're not going to change on it.
Because it's popular?
No, no, it's not.
With one of your constituencies?
No, it's not because it's popular. It's because it's right. Why should you have a tax that's in breach of fundamental human rights for a start, penalises people for having saved, sends all the wrong signals to young people about savings, and which is a straight betrayal of every one of those other parties who have supported the Superannuation Accord, every one of their positions.
Only very wealthy people are penalised.
No, no, you're wrong there.
$70,000 of income?
No, no,
is this land policy, the foreign ownership of land policy, negotiable? Because that's one thing to stick in everybody's core except the Alliance. the Forestry Corporation, the purchasing the Forestry Corporation back, would you negotiate on that? Because no one else would even live with that. You couldn't, if you didn't negotiate with that, you wouldn't have a coalition. So how negotiable are those policies?
Well, let's ask, how negotiable is that policy?
Yes.
The forestry?
Yes.
On the 27th of this month, Jim Bolger gets a cheque. If he's wise, he'll put it in the account paying the highest overnight rate for the next few days until the 12th of October. For we do intend to give the cheque back and to take the forest back.
And it's not negotiable?
No, it's not negotiable.
It's not even negotiable to get into a coalition?
Look, it's not negotiable for this reason. None of those people who have supported this policy ever consulted with any of the New Zealand electors. And we are going into election period and we won't have this contempt for the democratic process.
Is the rest of the foreign ownership foreign ownership of land policy non-negotiable either?
It's non-negotiable.
So,
you see, I'm reaching
is the superannuation non-negotiable? Because that's another thing that will stick with Labor. The surcharge, is that non-negotiable?
The surtax is non-negotiable. Our belief in abolishing it is non-negotiable. I don't think, though, that the superannuation policy will stick with Labor. The fact is 68% of New Zealand wants a compulsory retirement savings regime. 22% are opposed to it. In fact, you know, it's really national policy.
Have you done any figures on how much, say, in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, people over the age of 60 or 65 will get when you've got a doubled-up system of an inflation-indexed superannuation scheme plus a savings scheme?
Yes, we've done some calculations, but that's not the only reason we're doing this compulsory savings regime. This country is, in terms of international investment, in a deficit situation of about 75 billion and worsening by the year. We've observed that those economies that actually do have a savings regime are doing far better in every respect. Even Chile is now. Savings is part of the New Zealand psyche, but abandoned by recent economic faddism. We want to go back to doing what we used to do as a country.
We're going to come back to the question of the savings regime after the break. We've got to take a break now. Stay with us. We're back shortly with Winston Peters.
It's a matter of integrity. I need your word that my name will be kept out of it.
I promised that they would remain anonymous.
It's a matter of loyalty and trust.
We're nursing a viper at the breast. We better find them.
And the consequences couldn't be more serious.
You're sending me to prison.
Tell me the name of your source.
They got my booking.
It looks like fate's brought us together again.
If anything happens to me...
Backs are against the wall.
And it's only a matter of time before they catch you.
On Cover Story, 8:35 Wednesday on 1.
Let's talk about education. Sick of empty promises from the other parties? Has National fixed education? Do you think National ever will? Labor? Did they fix it last time? What about New Zealand First? Can you really trust them? You don't want to be betrayed again. Vote Alliance. Leadership you can trust.
The goose that lays golden eggs. I will give you my entire fortune.
My friend, she is not for sale.
What is it?
Kellogg's Crunchy Nut Cornflakes, coated with honey, encrusted with nuts, and totally irresistible. Kellogg's Crunchy Nut Cornflakes. The trouble is, they taste too good.
Glass wool is the most popular form of insulation in the world, and now you can have it in your home by simply asking for Bradford Gold. Bradford Gold gives you superior thermal performance for your dollar, plus noise control at no extra cost.
See Benchmark and get 20% off Bradford Gold. Plus, Benchmark will give you a free $200 gift voucher to spend on anything at Benchmark or Hardware House.
Glass wool from Bradford Gold, the new standard in insulation.
We wanted to buy a lot of new equipment. We talked to a lot of finance companies, but merit came up trumps. They were more than helpful in the respect of they had some good ideas too. We see a fair bit of the guy from Merit, and if we need to buy anything else, we can usually sort it out over the phone. If you're after finance, give them a call. They've been good to us.
Welcome back to this Meet the Press election special. Our guest tonight, New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters. Fran O'Sullivan.
Mr. Peters, you've made a giant bogey of foreign investment over the last few years. I put it to you, without foreign investment, we would have seen, if you like, the wiping out of New Zealand Inc. since the share market crash.
Well, we understand the difference between foreign investment and foreign control. Every economy, such as Japan, Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, looks at foreign investment in terms of it being good and programmed into their international or their national strategies for employment, for resource development, above all for exports. Foreign investment should be in our interest, not just in theirs, and that's the difference.
But without, surely it has been in our interest, though, to have foreign investment. I mean, arguably without it, we would have seen major companies like Carter Holt's crash. We've needed an injection of massive equity into this country. We saw so much wiped out through the share market crash and the speculative splurge of the 80s. So surely, I mean, we would have been down the toilet, if you like, without it in the last 10 years.
So a group of business interests engaged in the most speculative enterprises for a number of years, send this country to the worst crash of any country, where 6 of the worst 10 are New Zealand and the worst 4 in the world are New Zealand. And then they get their way by having to be bailed out by foreign money, which is in many cases not investment at all, just a corporate raid on this country's resources. And we all have to succumb to that. The reason why I'm going with a compulsory savings regime, that long term we have the vision of making ourselves independent.
But the horse has already bolted. I mean, you have already said, for instance, that it's going to take till in the next century to get 20 billion. Now, 20 billion will only buy, I would suggest by that time, a couple of our major companies, Telecom perhaps and Fletcher's. Now, it's not going to take you very far, Mr. Peters. It's a very small amount in real terms.
I agree. It'll take some considerable time. But I think that the psychology of New Zealand will demand that that savings regime remain. And over time, it'll begin to work. You're right, it'll take some time, but it'll start and be better if we start now.
Let's talk about the psychology of New Zealanders around that compulsory savings regime. Everybody gets to pay up to 8 cents of every dollar they earn into this compulsory savings scheme of New Zealand First. That seems to me to be the same as a tax increase of 8 cents a dollar, which means that the Alliance, Labour and New Zealand First are all going into this election promising an increase in taxation.
No, it's not taxation. This is a savings which each individual will have itemised and set aside as their own personal nest egg, and in no way can it be constructed as a tax. It's because they will always own it. It'll always be for them.
A compulsory levy, Mr. Peters, is a tax.
No, it's not. The compulsory levy, constructed as a tax, is something that goes from them and they never see the benefit of in a personal sense. It may be pulled otherwise to be within your construction. In our case, it is itemised, particularised to that person in each case.
You start that off with the tax cuts next year.
At 3%.
Do you plan to give any further tax breaks?
Yes, we do. But we're saying right now that the economy, and we constructed our economic plan on a much more conservative basis than Treasury or the government, and that's why we are wanting to signal our preparedness to wait until we see how the economy picks up before making any promises in that area.
Whether we get the 8 cents, whether we get the 8 cents in the dollar back at a point or not, you'll be aware of the fact that there are a lot of people in this country right now who can only just afford to pay off their mortgages for their own homes. 8 cents in the dollar, compelled, forced into a retirement fund, could well put them in the position of having to abandon their mortgages, to choose. Either you pay the mortgage or you pay Winston's 8 cents in the dollar.
No, no. They'll be able to pay their mortgages in a much more affordable fashion under New Zealand First government, because we intend to drive that dollar down in the interests of exporters, the most critical people we need for this country, and at the same time interest rates will fall back, because the very reverse is what's going on now, and that relief will begin to assist them in terms of their long-term savings capacity. It starts at 3%, don't forget.
I'm saying that the problem for many people is not long-term, Mr. Peters, it's short-term. And when people come to have to make a balance, do I pay the mortgage and put us in the position of being able to own our own home, or do we pay the 8 cents? We've got no choice about paying the 8 cents. You put people in an extremely invidious position in the short term.
Yes, I'm not underestimating the difficulty, but we have to start as a nation to be able to long-term finance our own development. We are in hock now to international money, and it's worsening by the year, and I think we've got a reason to be alarmed by it, and if that's the case, when are we going to do something about it? Now, we can raise every objection, and some may seem legitimate, but what is our situation going to be for our
Does that one seem legitimate, just a matter of interest?
Yeah, well, I mean, we contemplated that, we looked at it, we looked at the fact that it would not be easy. But I think the New Zealand people, if you put sacrifice to them where there is a guarantee of a better tomorrow, will go with it. The problem has been the last 12 years, every sacrifice with a worsting tomorrow, good for, say, 2 out of 10, bad for 8 out of 10.
But you've got a superannuation scheme, no surtax, indexed to inflation, so that the whole idea of the compulsory saving is not for their old age at all, which is now being assured by this new taxpayer-funded superannuation scheme. It's really for the benefit of the country. It's a capital fund, if you like, isn't it?
It's that.
So it is a tax.
No, it's not a tax. How can it be a tax?
Well, it's a capital fund, isn't it? It's not essential. The original Roger Douglas savings fund was a superannuation scheme. It was going to take the place of super. You're going to have a more generous superannuation scheme now than we've ever had, indexed to inflation, and you've got this fund as well.
That's right.
For the general good, as a capital fund.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, what's so difficult about it? Other countries have it. They're all the ones that are booming ahead. They're world leaders. This country's on a slide, despite everything that National might say. That's why you don't hear them campaigning on the recovery, because there is none. You don't hear them talk about export-led growth, because there is none.
They are.
Just quickly, because we've got to go to a break.
I'm quite interested in your fund. I mean, in New Zealand, we've got Singapore Investment Fund, obviously with large stakes here. Will this New Zealand fund be able to invest offshore, and will it then become an enemy offshore, like obviously foreign investors are to you?
Look, you're right. Most of the, well, significant proportion of the money coming to this country is exactly from the kind of funds that I'm talking about for our whole country to have. And yes, as in the interest of safety and spreading your risk, we're going to have a proportion offshore.
We'll take another break now. Stay with us. We're back in a moment.
65 electorates, 2.6 million voters, around 600 candidates, 27 parties. They're the numbers that will matter on Election Day, October 12. Right now, the numbers to watch are the regular One Network News Colmar Brunton opinion polls, backed up by reporters you know you can rely on for accurate, complete team coverage. One Network News at midday 6 and 9:40, answering the questions you want asked before New Zealand's first MMP election.
Watch your world with us.
Aha! Excuse me, ladies. Hey, you! Are you shocked at the price you've just paid for the Stu Ford motor car?
Shocked.
And stunned.
Shocked and stunned.
Shocking, isn't it? Aha! And here, this brand new laser for only $29.95. Shocking, isn't it? Hey, you! Hey! What's this? Free year in auto on this Telstar. Shocking, isn't it? Congratulations!
Shocktober! Shocking deals on new Fords, and it's on now.
E caffè percolateur, e fiddle de diddle de no, no, no.
Già presi il caffè. Ah.
Milch? Nein. Chiara Creme, Vienna Kaffee? Wunderbar.
Chiara, bellissimo cappuccino.
Jara, great coffee in anyone's language.
bacon. Sounds great to me.
Call into Firestone Direct and you'll find not just one special offer, but 3. So you can choose your own deal. You really do have a choice. Firestone Direct, the smart choice.
The Quarter King Galacticus. G'day. I've always loved the classics, and there's a few of them around these days looking better than ever. Like this one, British paints. This stuff is such good value, you Kiwis really went to town and painted the country with it. A great Kiwi classic, and still going strong, like me. And I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to you, but I always use British paints when I paint the house. And what about this classic? Trust British paints? Sure can.
Bedpost brings you the 15 by 15 Sealy sale. All Sealy Posturepedic beds are available at 15% off and with 15 months to pay. And the Sealy garland is now just $8.99. The 15 by 15 Sealy sale at Bedpost.
You can sleep on it.
Fruity Picks from Sanitarium. All the goodness of wheat picks with delicious chunks of real fruit. Can you imagine a better start to the day?
Yeah.
Fruity Picks from Sanitarium. Can you imagine a better start to the day?
You're with the Meet the Press election special. Our featured political leader tonight, Winston Peters. Fran O'Sullivan.
Mr. Peters, the chairman of New Zealand's largest company, Telecom, Peter Shirtcliffe, has warned Australian investors in just the last week against a change of government in this country and what it could mean. And he's picked out in particular New Zealand First and the Alliance and has said, I quote, that their policies are those of nostalgia, envy, anti-success, anti-business and xenophobic nationalism. Now surely the last point is one that you made in the last segment there, is something that in fact there is a fundamental truth about.
No, you know, what Mr. Shirtcliffe is engaging in is the interference of a multinational in New Zealand's domestic politics, and no self-respecting democracy in the Western world would tolerate it, except we've been so numb to it by certain establishment figures who have accepted it in the past.
But that's a homegrown multinational, Telecom.
Telecom's a homegrown, not home-owned. It's owned by Americans in the main. And
it's also owned by a large lump of New Zealanders who have shareholdings.
It might be, but it does not excuse him for having failed at the last election to pervert the course of electoral change with all the money he and his corporate mates could throw in. He assembled a thoroughly stuffed shirt affair that turned out to be himself, his wife and his daughter, called the Coalition for Better Government, in which he said he wanted to suggest all sorts of reforms. For 3 years we haven't heard one reform, of course. And then he goes off and slags New Zealand's democracy of all places.
No, he's not slagging democracy, he's slagging you, Mr. Peters.
He's slagging the People's Choice, though. He's talking about MMP as well. And frankly, I regard it as a matter of political treachery.
He's not, all he's doing is adding a democratic voice. It's his right to say what he said. And it's his right to say what he said wherever he chooses to say it.
Oh, I see. So it's his right to go across there and mislead the Australian investor, none of whom, of course, are going to take much notice of him, and that's just been true.
Well, in that case, they haven't been misled.
No, but I mean, mislead the people there with respect to the effect as a New Zealand voter might see it. You see, if we took it seriously, that all the Aussies took Mr. Shirtcliffe seriously, then people might change their vote. But they don't, and they won't.
New Zealand First has said that it will remove the cap on taxpayers' money that can be spent on Treaty of Waitangi settlements. The fiscal, the fiscal envelope goes, does it not?
Totally untrue.
All right, well, tell me what the policy is.
That's the kind of stuff that the National Party, in its desperation to stop New Zealand First, has been putting out. False, malicious, deceitful misinformation.
So the fiscal envelope stays?
No, the fiscal envelope is National's idea, no one else's. The fiscal envelope was never put to the New Zealand taxpayer. The fiscal envelope is opposed by the majority of Maori people. When we said from day one, this will never work, because it doesn't address New Zealand's critical problems, education, employment.
So the fiscal envelope goes?
That's right. But
well, that was the point of my question. Why are you arguing with me?
No, because your opening statement is wrong. You say, so there'll be no cap on the fiscal envelope. Sorry, the fiscal envelope is not New Zealand First idea. Our idea set out in Kawatea. Our idea, which was endorsed, I might add, by every National Party member of Parliament in '91, Our idea is to focus first not on the past, but the future for New Zealand and for young Maori, the vast majority.
But under New Zealand First, you're saying that there is no fixed limit on the amount that the government may have to find to settle treaty grievances.
No. Under New Zealand
There
First,
is a fixed limit?
No, look, you've got to understand the complexity of this problem. Most political parties accept that some grievances are legitimate and they must be settled. In contrast, though, New Zealand First takes this view, that if in these settlements we do not end up with a dramatic reduction in Maori undereducation, Maori underemployment, Maori over-representation in our prisons and our worst health statistics, then we will have got ourselves nowhere. And so we set out a plan.
Will you be spending more or less than the $1 billion set out in the fiscal envelope to settle treaty grievances?
Well, again, I see, I'm trying to give you to know how complex it is. It's complex for this reason. If you, in your treaty settlement process, cut a deal with Maoridom that sees us dramatically turn around their adverse social statistics, then that's a treaty settlement. But is it really? Or is it a contribution to New Zealand's long-term economic welfare? And I'm not going to slide by, because what I'm seeing is the convenient, simplistic answers of Jim Bolger. You know, solved everything by the end of the century. What? 58% of Maori in prisons?
You still haven't answered the question. You haven't answered the question. What is the expected attitude of New Zealand First to the Waitangi Tribunal, to future settlement of claims? Well, not apart from any social spending on Maori.
Well, with respect to the tribunal, the first thing we're going to do is beef up its academic excellence so that it has, in all cases, the credibility in its findings. The second thing we're going to do is not be enveloped in nationals process, which is an abysmal failure. We're going to look at not just past grievances, but there are a range of things that can be done, many of which are not monetary. The restoration of honour may be without any monetary compensation at all. It's restoration of honour. But the real expenditure that you should be asking me about is what are you going to do to take a race that has third world statistics and remove their dependence upon the taxpayer so they might make a contribution long-term to this country in the numbers they should. That's investment, and that's not a treaty settlement the way you're predicating it.
We're out of time, unfortunately. Thanks to my guest, Winston Peters, and to my colleagues from the media, Brendan Burns, editor of the Marlborough Express, Fran O'Sullivan of National Business Review, and Herald columnist Gordon McLaughlin. Next Sunday, Helen Clark. If you have a question you'd like us to ask the Labour leader, you can call us on this number, 0800 277 377. That's 0800 277 377. That's these Meet the Press election. I got carried away there for a moment. These Meet the Press election specials are also being broadcast live, of course, on the Radio Pacific Network. Thanks for being with us. We're back with Helen Clark next Sunday. Till then, good night.
One network with the people you know, the people you trust. An award-winning team of seasoned journalists cover the issues you say are important, the promises that will affect your decision, and the policies that will shape your future. One news team with unparalleled coverage. The party leaders face the media in Meet the Press. The politicians answer directly to you in Fraser Issues. One Network News brings you daily coverage on the campaign issues. Holmes meets the people those issues affect, and the leaders get their say in 2 home special leader debates. One place where your views count, your votes count. The Colmar-Brunton polls survey more people than any other, giving you the most accurate indicator on how the parties are faring. Plus, focus groups gauge the changing tides of public opinion. All leading up to one crucial night. Decision 96 on New Zealand's One.
Full of herself, isn't she?
Recriminations and finger-pointing in the aftermath of a hostage crisis. Authority in uproar